fiction, science fiction. We make no guarantees, however, how long it will remain fiction, fiction, fiction.
Stoic salutations, all you cognonauts out there, and welcome to Exofathom, the show that explores the outside reaches of understanding. I am your host, Nick, and I am joined by my two lovely co-hosts, as always. Ayla, how you doing?
I'm doing fine. How about yourself?
Wonderful. Thank you so much. And we got Mike here. How you doing, man?
I'm doing pretty good. It's Friday.
Pretty good. Pretty good is good enough these days. Well, thank you again for joining us, everybody, and we really appreciate you listening out there. And so we wanted to get into, in this exobit episode, I forgot. This is an exobit episode, which is a short episode, shorter than our normal episodes, which are usually about an hour and a half. We're going to try to keep this to 30 to 40 minutes. And in this episode, I wanted to explore Marcus Aurelius's Meditations and an excerpt from the book, his Meditations, which is on the degradation of the soul. Now, before I get into an introduction of who Marcus Aurelius is, and then maybe Stoicism, and then we get into the actual body of the excerpt, have you guys read any of Marcus Aurelius?
Just a little bit. I think you got a book a little while ago, and I recently saw it on the coffee table. So I did thumb through it, and yeah, I mean, it's good stuff. You know, a lot of it's kind of like basic common sense, but at the same time, there's like a little nugget of truth that you'll catch, and you're just like, "Whoa, that's challenging."
Yeah, and sometimes common sense is hard to come by. So, yeah,
Sure.
I definitely can see that. How about you, Mike?
Yeah, actually, I was lucky enough to buy Meditations a few years ago when I was getting really big into exploring Stoicism. It sits in like a little glass case now. I open it up and read it. It's definitely one of the books that helped my internal life a lot. And,
that's wonderful.
Right. Just trying to make me a little less dumb. I think that's the goal.
Yeah, well, I guess we could all use that, right? Is it in a display case with like a laser and everything?
Multiple lasers.
Oh, very good. I would expect nothing less.
And they will cut off hands. No.
Oh, Jesus.
That sounds like those lasers that my dad likes to play with. The ones that like light pieces of paper on fire and stuff.
Yeah, well, it's a bit like that. There's a few times when I almost stuck my hand in there, like half asleep. It's almost become a disaster.
Well, awesome, and I'm glad that you have familiar with this particular individual, and I know Ayla does as well. So, for the audience, if you do not know who Marcus Aurelius is, I'll give you a brief introduction. Marcus Aurelius Antonius was the Roman emperor from 161 to 180 and a Stoic philosopher. He was the last of the rulers known as the Five Good Emperors, and the last emperor of the Pax Romana, an age of relative peace and stability for the Roman Empire. He served as Roman consul in 140, 145, and 161. So Roman emperor, I actually didn't really know that. I thought he was a general for some reason. And but yeah, the Roman emperor thing is pretty cool. Could you imagine, like, you're one of these like emperor philosophers? Like, would it like to live in a society where your like emperor is also a philosopher?
I mean, hopefully they like philosophers in the society. Otherwise, it'd be a little bad.
Right. Well, and then hopefully, his ideas don't get away with him and he doesn't start, creating experiments on his people. That's kind of what I think about. It's like, philosophers can get pretty heady. And when you have the resources to play God, I wonder if you do.
That almost sounds like psychologists.
That's true.
Not
That's
philosophers.
True. Yeah, no, I definitely would agree.
But there are some philosophers that have done some pretty horrific things in the name of research, like that one guy that like put his son in a box that was like a white room.
Oh, right. Yeah.
Just him and his friend observed for all that time, and it's pretty crazy.
Yeah.
Good old fashioned fun before TV.
Oh yeah.
Thanks, TV.
Well, I
And,
always thought
yeah.
philosopher for an emperor would just be like one giant filibuster. You know, like you go to hear him speak and he just goes on and on
Yeah,
and
it would be
on.
long indeed.
You're like,
And imagine, like you're like, his opponent, like political opponent, and you're just like some farmer that, like
man.
just like plowed the fields all your life, and like, I have some ideas on how we might govern, and then, you got Mr. Smarty Pants over here.
You got ideas, let me tell you. But you know what I liked about him? One of his favorite books was written by an enslaved individual, Epictetus.
Epictetus.
Epictetus?
Yes, another Stoic philosopher. He's the one who's like, if your kid dies, don't worry, just have another one. I mean, in reality, it's kind of on point because the amount of grief you go through is not worth, at least in his mind, is not worth just looking over and having a new kid. You can have it fills the same role.
Damn.
Well, and when you basically live to 40, you wanted to make sure
you could
kids as you could.
Yeah. right.
So moving on, Stoicism. I just wanted to run a brief definition for maybe people who are not familiar with the school of philosophy. Stoicism is a school of the Hellenistic philosophy founded by Zeno and Citium in Athens in the early 3rd century BC. It is a philosophy of personal ethics informed by its system of logic and its views on the natural world. According to its teachings, as social beings, the path to, eudaimonia, which is happiness or blessedness, is found in accepting the moment as it presents itself, not by allowing oneself to be controlled by the desire or pleasure by the desire for pleasure or fear or pain, by using one's mind to understand the world and to do one's part in nature's plan, and by working together and treating others fairly and justly. So I'm going to get into the excerpt really quick, and I'm going to read them. There's 5 little points, and then I'll read all 5, and then we'll circle back and get your guys' input for each one. So this is an excerpt from Marcus Aurelius's Meditations, and it says, the human soul degrades itself, one, above all, when it does its best to become an abscess, a kind of detached growth on the world. To be disgruntled at anything that happens is a kind of secession from nature, which comprises the nature of all things. Comprises, pardon me. 2, when it turns its back on another person or sets out to do harm, as the souls of the angry do. 3, when it is overpowered by pleasure or pain. 4, when it puts on a mask and does or says anything artificial or false. And 5, when it allows its action and impulse to be without a purpose, to be random and disconnected. Even the smallest things ought to be directed towards a goal. But the goal of rational beings is to follow the rule and law of the most ancient of communities and states. So let's get to the first one here. Above all, when it is, when it does its best to become an abscess, a kind of detached growth on the natural world. To be disgruntled at anything that happens is a kind of secession from nature, which comprises the nature of all things. Ayla, what does that bring to your mind just off the bat?
Oh, well, going back to eudaimonia, the goal is to be #blessed, right? So, so this just seems like, above all, you don't want to be a jerk or disgruntled, grumbly about things. It makes me think of Under the Tuscan Sun, my classic old movie reference. There's a line about those people that you meet, and they're just angry, disgruntled people, and you think, God, what the hell happened to you? You know? And what happened was that something terrible happened, and they had a choice to either learn from it, move on, pick up, keep striving, or to turn and just be like miserable, like the guy in Up, you know, the Pixar movie.
Mm-hmm.
So that's kind of like what comes to mind. I also think that it's interesting that Reiki, one of the first tenets, is also do no anger. So I think it kind of goes into the same realm.
Yeah, I can definitely see that. Mike, what about you? What comes off the mind right off the bat?
Well, it's sort of like I was saying earlier, that idea that if you're mad at some loss or disgruntled or angry, then this kind of disrupts the natural flow of things. Sort of, you know, like anger is kind of a tool of the stupid. It's also another Stoic principle. Anger can stem from simply not having an intellectual awareness of your situation. So you're running on pure emotions, and usually destructive. But this stands in contrast to Aristotle's thoughts around anger, where it's like you do want to use anger in the right way. There's a way to use it, and figuring out the way to use it is what can separate a normal human from a great human.
Yeah.
But I do find it interesting that it's a detached growth. So it's like a cold anger. It's like a cold sort of. It's not tied to reality anymore.
Right.
Like,
And
it has to seed it from nature. So
right.
you have left whatever your kind of nature is, and now have become this abstract cancer to whatever social situation you're in.
Or your environment. Yeah, and I think it's interesting to me is the concepts of I think this is the separation that you're pinpointing, this separation or divorce from nature. It's not just the anger, but it's futile anger that's impotent almost, you know, like it's this the anger that, about things that are beyond your grasp or control at all. Because when I hear nature, I hear this, you know, not just like, you know, nature, trees and all this stuff, but a mechanism bigger than you that you cannot really control, or, you know, and you can't really be the person behind the wheel when nature is involved. And so this concept of like futile anger is what I think really pops out to me, is this like, don't be angry at the things that you have no control over. Now, this doesn't disregard the concept of justified anger, in my opinion. Maybe it does for most Stoics, but I think that there is a place for anger, but there is really no place for this, you know, anger that doesn't serve you. And it just, like Ayla says, it makes you more and more alien to not only yourself, but the people around you.
Yeah.
I like that. Well, and I like that you bring up nature, and you know, he even mentions the nature of all things. And we like to forget that we're animals still. You know, we're smart animals, but we're part of the natural world too. And yet we still keep ourselves separate. There's trees, forests, animals, and then there's humans. But, you know, if you consider that we're part of this, you know, grouping of beings on this earth, you know, you don't really see cats getting mad that they fell off of a counter or something like that. They just kind of move on. If you do see any kind of anger, it's usually like a self-preservation mechanism. So you can kind of look at it through that lens too, because again, here, it's just more to be disgruntled. It's not anger in the pursuit of doing something or in protection and standing up. You know, it's like just being angry for the sake of being angry.
Yeah, and I kind of envision it as somebody like standing waist deep in a river and trying to push it back with their hands. You know what I mean? Like it's this concept of like it's not even just like it's not even just like blind anger or, you know, like ignorant anger, but it's also like this almost narcissistic sort of anger that I can be the one that pushes back the river, you know. And I think that the quicker you realize that the only thing you can do to a river is float on it, the happier you'll be.
Unless you're a salmon.
Unless you're a salmon, then you can swim upstream. That's true.
Mm.
Salmon, don't take my advice.
Or a lazy grizzly bear. I was looking at live camera feeds of rivers and things just to kind of work and have something pretty in the background. And I stumbled across these bears in Alaska. They literally just sit in the waterfalls and wait for a salmon to jump in their lap. These lazy bears.
They got the good life.
They
Yeah,
really
they good
do, and
life.
they're adorable.
I think it's good though that you brought up the idea of having no control, or situations where you have no control, and not taking an emotional reaction to it, because that is like one of the core tenets of Stoicism, and oddly enough, like Alcoholics Anonymous.
Right.
There are some parallels between that book they give you. I don't know if it has a name, and overall like Stoic philosophies.
Yeah, and it's interesting too, and as we go on, we'll kind of probably touch on this as well. This sort of philosophy came around the 3rd century BC, so that's 300 years before the alleged Jesus came into the world. And I see a lot of
Alleged.
similar. I'm just trying to be fair here.
Yeah.
But it's interesting to me that these kind of like, it seems as though that the Stoicism principles kind of laid the groundwork for Christianity in a way, which seems maybe ironic, but it also just proves that good ideas are always picked up by the cultures. And like it says to jump ahead, but it says in number 5, like, the rational beings follow the rule and law of the most ancient of communities and states. It's the concept of bringing the good ideas from history with you as you progress into the future. So I think that that's interesting that, these kind of concepts were adopted within the Christian rubric and then brought in to more modern times.
Have you ever seen The Sunset Limited?
That's the the one with
Bill Murray?
No, Tommy Lee
No.
Jones and
Samuel L. Jackson.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's an argument about God between a non-believer and a believer. But Samuel L. Jackson says something that's really like poignant to me, especially when it comes to like picking up new philosophies to like better yourself. And he talks about the Bible and his relationship with it. And he's like, well, if I was a better man, if I was a more complete man, I wouldn't need the Bible at all. I would just kind of know how to behave this way, as sort of like tying back to this, like as nature intended, the most ancient of natures. So you may not even need to read these sorts of philosophies just to pick up sort of like if you're rolling through good vibes, just keep doing that.
Right. Yeah, and I definitely think there's something a little bit intuitive to a lot of the lessons that we've carried throughout the eons. Like it's interesting because, and I don't want to get too far away from the conversation, but it is interesting to kind of look at it as a chicken or the egg. Did we bring these into modernity, and is it intuitive, or is it intuitive because we brought these philosophies with us as we progressed? Because we have the benefit of thousands of years of thinkers and philosophers to kind of curate morality. It's interesting to me to think about, like, is that a thing? Is that something that we are intuiting, or is it we are intuiting because we've had so many people work these problems out in the past?
And I think that's a really good distinction, because the Samuel L. quote I love, and at the same time I would challenge it, because you could say, I don't need the Bible or some book to tell me how to act. I know who I am, and I know, common sense and how to navigate things. But the thing is you only know what you know up until the point that you say you know it.
Right.
You can't anticipate what tomorrow is going to bring. And, they always have these stories of people, on their deathbed or the end of their life or on the war lines or whatnot. And, in a lot of cases, they will start praying in that moment, or the fear comes in, or it's just something you could have never expected and you suddenly find yourself lost. Which is why that book, Mike, The 12 Traditions, that's the AA book, I looked it up. But it has all those little like tenets to just help guide you when you're slogging through the river and you can't control it.
Mm-hmm.
I gotcha.
Yeah, so let's jump to number 2 because it's kind of a short one. So it says number 2 is the soul degrades itself when it turns its back on another person or sets out to do it harm, as the souls of the angry do. So this kind of piggybacks on the first sort of principle of not becoming angry and disgruntled about things you cannot control. And then this kind of adds this sort of extra layer to this concept of do not let that anger out on somebody else, and don't let it blind you from the help that you can give your neighbor or the common man.
Oh, tell it to Tinder, man. All these people, all these heartbroken people taking it out on unsuspecting folk. It's so sad.
What, like angrily swiping the wrong direction?
Yeah, like there's all those memes where it's like, heal yourself before you try to date. You're just spreading the misery and like all this stuff. So it just makes me think about that.
I gotcha.
Yeah.
I gotcha.
It's meme stuff.
All the memes.
All the memes.
Well, yeah, I think, this one is pretty straightforward. It's something that we've been, that's been drilled into our heads ever since we were children. So I don't know how much exploring it needs, but it's, the concept of harming other people out of anger is still something that we as modern humans have to wrestle with almost all the time. There are some of us that, like can probably do it better than others, but I don't think that there's anybody who hasn't struggled with controlling their emotions and not letting them affect another person.
Yeah, it's a difficult thing, that's for sure.
Mm-hmm.
The only point where I disagree with this is if somebody has done you harm, and in a way that like you can't necessarily back out from, right?
Right.
Like you can't turn your back on this relationship for whatever reason.
Mm-hmm.
I don't like. I get we're not being blindly angry and just lashing out at random people, but if it's justified anger and it's directed, then it may. I think there's a little bit of leverage to say that you don't necessarily degrade yourself, or if you are degrading yourself, you are heading towards a ennoblement process through degradation or degeneration of the soul, which is something like Nietzsche points out. But no, I think that's the one little caveat I would throw in there.
And I definitely wouldn't disagree with you. Oh, go for it, Ayla. Sorry.
Oh, well, I was just thinking of like the Count of Monte Cristo, because it sounds to me a little bit like vengeance. And I think that's kind of interesting because we're talking about the soul. And, if you think there's a reward at the end of your life, you want your soul to be good. Or maybe you just want it to be good to be good. But, when it comes into matters of justice, I think it's interesting to think about how there were people that just rested on God to take care of justice in the end, or karma or whatnot. But I do think it's a interesting thought to think about how vengeance, or calling it justice, when taken into your own hands when wronged, takes into account in this number 2 line here.
Well, and I think that's a really interesting point that you guys bring up, because I think I could respond to it with number 3, which is the soul degrades itself when it's overpowered by pleasure or pain. And I would say that a seeking of vengeance is a mixture of both pleasure and pain. Mm-hmm. It's the pleasure, it's the pain that drives the vengeance and the pleasure of achieving that vengeance. So I'm not trying to say that like I would take the high road. I'm just saying like maybe that's kind of like the reasoning is like, okay, understandably there is a need for justice when you are wronged, but if we're taking it too far, then it becomes vengeance. And so like perhaps there is room in which you can met your justice out, as long as you're not overpowered by the pleasure or the pain of meting out that justice.
Yeah. Well, and two, it's like, they always, I don't know, like in movies and things, always say like once you get vengeance or justice, you feel regret, because if it if you're a good person and someone did you harm, you just hurt yourself by like lowering yourself to their level.
Which is that old proverb, right? Justice is a dish best served cold.
Yeah. It's a
So
Klingon proverb,
it
though, isn't it?
it's a great proverb, man. Hey,
It
look,
is.
it's from old school Star Wars or Star Trek. I can say it's a proverb now.
Rock, chalk, rock, chalk.
But I think that kind of touches to the concept of like there is probably a point or where revenge may be appropriate, but it's the hot and fiery revenge that will make your soul degrade, perhaps. And they also say the best revenge is a happy life. So I think there's something in between that.
I was just gonna ask, like, because like anger is a useful tool for many things. But as far as revenge, if you can use that revenge to better yourself in some way, sort of like you go through a breakup, so you're gonna work out so that you're hotter for the next person or something like that. I think it's incredibly useful, and if done in a productive way.
Yeah,
I guess going along with the Stoic lines is not harming anybody else, but do you harm somebody else if you better yourself?
Well, if you look super fine, you take all the honeys, then you're harming all the other guys in the bar, man.
I mean, I think the only harm that you could do by bettering yourself is harming the perception other people have of you. But aside from that, I don't think that there is any harm in bettering yourself. So, I mean, that would be an appropriate case of revenge for sure.
To fit into those Stoic guidelines.
I like that you said, what did you say, your reputation? Did you say reputation, or did I just hear that?
What are you speaking of? Who?
No, never mind. I thought I heard you say something, and then I just kind of thought to myself, I think you used a different word. So I'm going to hold that thought, maybe for another chat. But well, no, I mean, I guess I could just say it real quick. So Marcus Aurelius was actually one of the more respected emperors in Roman's time. And so I just wanted to bring up that, like, when he talks about the human soul, I almost feel like you could talk about it like your name or your reputation or your honor. Because, yeah, I mean,
your legacy.
Your legacy.
That's not your soul, though.
That's not your soul.
Much different than your legacy or your honor or your reputation.
Yeah, but if you're an emperor and people are going to be writing smack about you, then that's going to be eternal, whether or not your spirit is.
Yeah, it's true. But I don't think it takes the place of your soul, though. But no, as far as like being overpowered by pain or pleasure, Jesus. That's a good way to degrade yourself, to get down to that null.
That null.
Well, it's also just very indulgent,
Yeah, hedonistic.
Yeah,
you're definitely diving into like one of the extremes, and you are enjoying it. You're overpowered by pain. Sometimes it's fun to be sad, especially if you're using that. You're using that thing to make a song, do some sort of artistic work.
That's very true. And I also thought too, I used the word vengeance, but it could also just be that you're doing like a necessary harm to prevent the person that harmed you from harming others, which kind of gets into number one, where it's saying, or number two, where it says, you don't turn your back on another person. So, if there's someone who's bad, a bad actor, is there a moral imperative to do something about them?
Yeah, definitely. Well, and yeah. Let's jump to number 4 then. Number 4, the soul degrades itself, or when it puts on a mask and does not say, or pardon me, and does or says anything artificial or false. Now, this isn't a COVID PSA, so you guys.
What are you going to say? Trump's eroding the soul of the America.
I want to do a quote like Marcus Aurelius said, that it's not it's your soul or a mask. See how it goes like wildfire.
Oh, man.
It would.
Yeah.
It would.
be taken. Never mind. All right, I'm not gonna make it.
I think there's a difference between degrading your soul and forgetting your soul. Because when you put on a mask, or you start doing artificial things, or start lying, or telling stories, whatever the reason is, you are removing yourself. I don't know if you're degrading yourself though.
I mean, I guess there's times and places for the wearing of a mask, but I would kind of interpret it as like basically acting and speaking out of truth, or out of the truth. So basically, like the concept of just not being true to yourself, and then not speaking truthfully. Because I mean, these are all, as I said, these are very old concepts and kind of like, Aesop's fable sort of stuff. But it's, like, just because they're mundane to us doesn't mean that they weren't revolutionary when they were thought of.
Still are.
Yeah, I think so too. But it's, when you say like, oh, you should tell the truth and not lie about who you are, everybody's like, yeah, I've heard that a million times before. But there's something very, very profound about how that chips away at you inside.
Do you think people that put on masks professionally, do you think they have a soul? Do you think it's just worn away by these standards over just time?
Well, I mean, I think I think you might be construing the physical idea of a soul, and then the idea, like the metaphysical idea of the soul. Because when I'm interpreting the soul, I don't think that like a little gas bar starts to go down every time you tell a lie. I think of it more as like it's you're doing yourself a disservice, and then it's eating away at your soul, like, metaphorically.
I gotcha.
But yeah, I don't know. I wouldn't know. I mean, there's a lot of people who have struggled with, with that sort of thing, especially, method actors and stuff like that. They've definitely struggled to get out of those roles that, that they got really deep into. And, people like Daniel Day-Lewis, sometimes they, talk about how they don't really, I mean, I don't have to use him. Gary Oldman lost his accent, because he spent so many movies doing different accents. Like, he doesn't have his native accent anymore.
Well, even like stepping away from, I guess, from actors, but like the common like office worker, where they don't want to work the office job or something, and it eventually becomes who they are. Is that whole office structure.
Yeah, I mean, I think that there's probably a little bit of us that dies inside whenever we take something that we're not happy with. But but it doesn't mean that you can't find some sort of happiness and wholeness from a situation that you may not be 100% happy with. Like if you're working at an office and like you really want to be a race car driver. Well, I mean, you should never stop trying to be a race car driver, but you still do need to support yourself and your family and all of those things. So that office situation does provide you that opportunity.
As long as you put on the mask.
As long as you put on the mask, but maybe you don't even need to put on a mask. Like there's ways to appreciate things that may not necessarily be the most glamorous,
That's true.
Well, and I wonder...
It's 2020 though. HR departments are ruthless.
Yeah, that's true.
Well, I was just thinking too, I wonder what the phrase fake it till you make it, like how that would be applied here. Because I do feel like on some level you're being untrue to yourself when you put on false airs or do anything artificial. But in the recognition that you're always transforming and becoming the next you.
Well, what if you fake it and don't make it?
Right. Then your soul is very degraded and disgruntled.
Yeah. I think that's kind of where the line is,
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I guess it's only delusional if it doesn't become reality.
Right.
If it doesn't become reality, then it's really delusional.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, and I think I'm misunderstanding some of the tenets here, because I realized in the definition of Stoicism, there's very much of a sense of being in the momentness,
Mm-hmm.
that you aren't supposed to be preoccupied with the future, whether it's a good future or a bad future. You're supposed to just conduct yourself rightly so in the now. So I think, yeah, the challenges of future self doesn't necessarily hold in this vacuum, but it's interesting to think about.
Mm-hmm. And let's get on to the last one, which says the soul degrades itself when it allows its actions and impulse to be without a purpose, to be random and disconnected. Even the smallest things out to be directed towards ought. I think that's supposed to be ought. My notes are wrong. Ought to be directed towards a goal. But the goal of rational beings is to follow the rule and law of the most ancient of communities and states. This one kind of felt like two different tenets to me. Maybe he just didn't want to make six. But I do like the concept of not allowing your actions and impulses to be without purpose. So this kind of brings back down to what you were saying, Mike, about revenge or acting out of anger. If there is a purpose to your anger, then it would seem that would fly with the Stoic sort of philosophy.
They wouldn't like the fact that you're using anger in any way. They would say something. I would imagine they would say something like you're going to get like a false positive in a way. Like if you're trying to better yourself out of revenge, then your foundation for bettering yourself is bad, and the outcome will be bad because it's all directed by anger.
Right.
But that's my own personal take on what I've read in kind of the Stoics' outlooks on anger. They really don't like it.
Somebody got smacked around as a kid, that's for sure.
Yeah, just like, I'm done. I'm not smacking anybody else around.
And then even and then the kind of the second part of this whole thing, but I think it's really interesting too, is like the rational beings follow the rule and law of the most ancient of communities and states. This is kind of what I was talking about, bringing the things that work in the past with us in the current and then into the future, like taking from the good ideas of the past and building something new. Am I interpreting that right?
Yeah, the way that the way that I'm seeing it is that the impulse usually happens without some sort of purpose, so it removes you away from this goal, whatever goal it may be. However, the goal of all beings, of all rational beings, is to follow rules and laws of whatever we intuited from ancient time.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
And with those ideas, we can push forward to continue towards this goal as we bring out these ancient ideas and push them forward. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
What do you got, Ayla?
Oh, I was just going to add, I think number 5 assumes that the person writing, or the communities and states writing those laws, were following laws 1 through 4 ahead of itself. Because, yeah, like Mike's saying, in a perfect world, you would have people striving to be their best selves and to do right by others and to live an honest life. And then for them to make laws that are carried into the future for other people to do their best self in the world. So in that regard, you're always striving for excellence and following the logic and the rule of nature, which is actually a cooperative entity, much that we like to call it competitive. But.
Right. Yeah, no, I definitely agree. I think there's something in there that's kind of lost in the translation too, because I kind of see it as like when they say rule of law of the most ancient of communities and states, like, well, when you think about it, like, okay, so if a community is ancient and if a state is ancient, that means that it's put into practices things that will ensure its longevity and success. So that's kind of the way I see it, as it's like you don't necessarily you aren't looking at like we talked in the last episode, the people burning children in a giant bull statue. Like you're looking at the most successful societies throughout the ages, and even some of the ones that are still around today, right? So yeah, I think that there's something interesting about kind of like preserving good ideas throughout the eons.
Machiavelli would say that the goal of like a state, it should be permanence. Like we all freak out all the time about what form our government takes, and it should be proper that we freak out about those things. But no matter what form it is, its goal should be permanent. So through the eons, and with it, the knowledge that comes with it. And I think this is just the more intellectual, non-political based version of it.
Right. Yeah, agreed. Ayla, you got?
Well, yeah, I was just thinking, going back to the idea of nature, because he's saying, the rule and law of ancient, like, kind of just trying to bring order to chaos, which I understand. And I think it's kind of interesting because, when you think about the world and the universe, I think there's arguments on both sides between, what do they call it, like entropy and chaos, and it's just all random versus that, what is it, like divine planning, or what's the term? There's a term for it.
Intellectual design, or the intelligent design of the universe.
Right, exactly.
Creator, God.
So it's like, are humans adhering to a nature that's already bound by certain rules and order and cohesion, or are humans trying to bend nature and form logic where there was none and out of chaos? I think that's kind of an interesting thing just to think about the two, especially because, ancient communities and states said nothing about like the internet, so it's like, it's hard to kind of think about applying things in the past to the future that you don't know about.
Well, we do though. So our whole law system is based on thousands of years of trial and error.
Right.
I've been thinking about this, and I think social media in the long run is going to become like the form of ancient Greek times. I think we'll eventually get past this sort of like we can say whatever we want phase, and start to cultivate people who take like celebrities now, or maybe it would just be a different form of celebrity. But I feel like in time we will get back to this sort of ancient Greek style of debate in forms, but
like gladiators of intellectuals yelling at each other.
Yeah, through some triple Twitter or something that you have more than 140 characters to explain yourself.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you got to think of the internet as if it's its own little, universe that was created, right? So it's been around for about 20-something years. So it's about a 23-year-old. And this 23-year-old individual is going to be full of itself and very sure of the world and think that it knows everything. By the time the internet becomes about 30 or 40, maybe it will mellow out. Maybe it will have a little bit of an enlightenment. Or it's, like this whole simulated universe thing, and it's running in fast forward. So it's like we've been beating each other over the heads with sticks and stuff for the past, 15 years. And maybe we're starting to get a little bit out of that sort of thing. And, we've created fire, and now we have the wheel, and now we're starting to build little villages, and we're going to war with each other. And, soon enough we'll have cities, and then, perhaps we'll have some sort of, renaissance.
Yeah. Well, go ahead, Mike.
I'm just super. What does the internet's midlife crisis look like?
It's gonna be hilarious.
Right? I think it was TikTok. People like, I'm gonna do a dance. I like that dance. I'm gonna do the same dance. Oh, I can do that dance too. But I think it's interesting talking about social media and forums and things like that, because rule and law, you can't have a crime without a law, right? Like, and in a way, the idea of taking, like, so if you want vengeance, well, if there's a law, there's a way to have a system where not the human, but the state punishes the person that does that. And I just think it's an interesting kind of thing, because there's a lot to be said about like punishment and the history of it if you read Foucault. And And then, now there's a lot of talk about restorative justice, and there's even talk about like social credit implementation. So it's just fascinating how these things develop. And, like you said, if we're a 23-year-old, maybe we're shifting into some weird, different I don't even know. I don't know what the
When I was
look like.
23, I was a sad university student that didn't go to many parties.
Oh, no.
So I imagine it's like the same thing, right? Like it's just some sad kid who just wants to be social but doesn't know how.
There's lots of options, but
lashes out at their parents still. It's taken one political science class and thinks it knows everything.
Oh, no.
And now it's a philosophy major.
Right.
Still asks mom for money.
Yeah, exactly. All right. Well, that was great. We could probably talk about this for a lot longer, but the point of Exobits is to keep it bite-sized for everybody. So I think we're going to wrap it up there. I enjoyed that. Thank you guys. Thank you, Mike. Thank you, Ayla, for the conversation. It was very awesome as always. And thank you guys for listening. We really appreciate you out there. Please give us a follow on YouTube and Facebook at Exofathom. Please consider following us there. I know that we're trying to gain some more followers on both of those platforms. You can also find us on Instagram at Exofathom. That's EXOFATHOM. And please, consider giving us a follow on there. And then you can catch the whole list of shows that we're a part of over at thinkering.space. That would be Exofathom, The Plank with Joe, If Numbers Can Talk, and Thinkering. I think that's it from me, guys. You guys got anything else before we kick it?
What do Alexander the Great and Kermit the Frog have in common? They have the same middle name. That was my little joke from just to leave us.
All right.
I know. I'm going to try to find more topical jokes. That's hard to find Roman jokes.
Yeah.
I was going to. What do you mean? Just look at Nero. Nero's whole life. I was going to try to jump into something about Nietzsche with the ennoblement process, but that joke blew my hair back.
Was that bad?
Go for it. The idea, real quick, is that as your soul gets weaker, as you sort of degrade, you will find strength in different areas, and you can it gives you a valuable time to move around. Like if this is an RPG, like different talent points in your build, in your psychological, spiritual, physical build. Mm-hmm. And as your soul degrades, you have an opportunity to become noble. To take these disadvantages and turn them into advantages, much like someone who's blind in one eye may have a stronger other eye. Just these, are completely blind, they have better senses. Mm-hmm. So it's not always a bad thing that the soul degrades. I think for me, my soul kind of moves in cycles. So I see similar patterns of behavior and similar, breaks and then kind of rises again. So I think it's all sort of a cyclical process, but managing yourself during the cyclical process is extremely important.
Very well said. And yes, please, you guys take care of your souls and, be good to yourself and be good to others. I know things are going crazy right now, but we definitely need more positivity and good camaraderie between people that we love, and just try to focus on that in these kind of crazy times that we're living in. And, we'll all make it through. Just got to take care of each other. So with that said, we'll see you on the next one, Cognonauts, and we'll catch you on the next Exofathom. Good night, everyone.
Peace.
Later.